My name's Claire O'Neill, and we are going to be talking about a very interesting question, at least we all believe so, and that is festivals, birthplace of the Green Revolution. And this is an absolute platinum stellar lineup, I have to say, because I could do at least a 1 hour keynote interview with each one of these individuals. What we're going to do is talk about each person's journey from the beginning, not from birth, maybe we haven't quite got time for that, but their journey through festivals, through festival culture, and then what they've taken out into the world with a perspective on the Green Revolution. I'm going to make a start to frame the scenario from my perspective. So, I'm 42 now, and about 20 years ago, I discovered free parties. I went out into the woods, saw solar-powered sound systems, organic food. I think it was 2004 was the first time that I came to Glastonbury, and I was working on lunch at Lizard's Chai Cafe across the way. And I was so inspired, having come from living in a town, basically. The greenery was basically the backdrop, and grew up on TV, 80s and 90s TV, not very good for the mind or the soul. I knew about recycling, but was in no way an environmentalist. It wasn't part of my life. We were very much a loving, big family with Irish Catholic roots, but nothing related to any kind of alternative culture. And then coming out and seeing this kind of lifestyle, these alternative ways that things could be done, really opened my eyes to what was possible. And at the same time, I went to do music industry management at university, and I thought, how can I manage an artist or run a record label when there's something called a carbon footprint or sustainable development, and we're overshooting all of these limits on the planet? And then I could see ways, solutions through places like Green Futures, through the alternative cultures that I've come to discover through festivals and alternative culture, alternative parties, should we say. But I could see the mainstream was very much going in the opposite direction. So I thought, well, how can you take something that's a counterculture essentially and bring it into the masses, which is what is necessary in order to make significant change and live differently as a people. So from my perspective, it's definitely been a significant influence. Meanwhile, I also became an aerialist because of endlessly climbing on things, which meant that I got to meet Pip. Actually, we met at not a free party, but a very badly organised festival in Spain in 2004. But this showed also the touring world, and when festivals move around, something grows from there and goes around the world. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail on that, because we're going to hear from each of these amazing individuals and their stories. You do have enough time to really tell your story as well, and then we'll come back to that question of, is this the birthplace of the Green Revolution? So Sam Hermitage, I'm going to start with you, if you'd like to tell us, how did this come about?
How did this, the Green Futures Field and all it stands for?
Exactly, and your story within it, your journey.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I'm a baby boomer, and my parents were very tied up and traumatised by the Second World War, and that's what wars do to people. They don't do them any good at all. Youth culture was developing, wasn't it, in the 60s, and with the hippies branching out and LSD and all that stuff, and festivals were around. We've always had festivals. They're always a part of celebration for everyone, and they've always been there. I guess they've always been there in some form, and as far as I was concerned, my upbringing was totally different to the festival culture, and I was just sort of hooked on to those guys at school that wore different clothing to normal and stuff. So, through that it was kind of like a transition. I went to a few free festivals in the 70s, and I realised how people could express themselves and start to live together and to start to communicate and learn from each other. So, you know, that's how I got introduced to this kind of festival. And then in the 80s, of course, was when I started to get involved in the organisation point of view, and I was involved with a festival in Kingston, which was quite a groundbreaking festival called the Kingston Green Fair, one of the earliest green fairs in the world, I think. So we were very privileged to be involved with that, along with people like Des Kay and Jean Fiddler, who's in the audience. Yeah. And so we were involved with that. And we started putting together green ideas at this festival, and we were amazed at the amount of green ideas that people had in different forms, in different ways. So, you know, through doing that, we got introduced to Glastonbury, and we got invited to work at Glastonbury on this field. So I've been working on this field since 1990, and you know, some of the other people, Dale, came on the field many years ago with wind phones, his wind phones. I'm not sure he actually paid for the pitch. Did you pay for the pitch?
He never asked me to.
We'll settle up after this. Yeah, so that's more or less my story.
I remember the Kingston Green Fair. It was hugely inspirational. Again, being in London after going to university, it took it into the centre of the city as well, and you might find more things that perhaps out in the country where people are more connected to nature. Have you found, this is 35 years ago that you were doing Green Futures, and then even longer with Kingston Green Fair. What's the shift that you've seen since that time? Like the response that you get from people? Do you think things have progressed? Have they got worse? What's the influence here?
I'm sure people accept green ideas and principles as part of the mainstream. And, you know, alternative energy, renewable energy is a must. We have to have it now. But whereas in those days, it was a new thing, and it was a thing of, you know, people made fun of it. It wasn't really, people couldn't accept that we could actually live our lives using renewable energy. Yeah, so that's some of the changes. A lot of the principles and changes of green thinking come together at these sort of events and have a kind of ripple effect. People have learned. It's like a bit of a university, isn't it, a festival like this? And you know, people are influenced by all sorts of things at festivals, quite a lot of drink and drugs. But on the other side of things, people watch things and they notice things and they are impressed and inspired, and I think that's our role. That's what we have to do.
Thank you. And Pip, I'm going to come to you. I know because we've both described how we came from quite a different background actually, but I know that you were at Glastonbury from very young and immersed in that world. Can you tell us your story, how you went from being in diapers on festivals through to what you're doing now?
Okay, so I was from a family of artists, and yeah, grew up in a very, very sort of alternative, artistic kind of way. My brother started Mutoid Waste. He was 20 years older than me, Joe Rush. So I used to come here, as you say, I used to come here in nappies. My parents would drag me around the place. I remember some pretty crazy things, although when I was a kid I didn't realise they were crazy. I just thought the world was full of nutters. And as I grew up, realised that was quite a small scene. But I was always interested in tinkering with cars and bikes and a bit more into technology than my family. And funnily enough, I actually remember coming here. I don't know how old I was, maybe an early teenager or 10 or something. And I remember seeing a solar-powered radio-controlled car, robot type thing. And it totally blew my mind, and it stood out. And I remember just thinking that's technology is actually what I'm really interested in, and there is a side of technology that sort of overlaps with this more alternative culture that I guess I was growing up in. So I did end up doing a degree for a year in sustainable design, and I got really into the idea of going down that sort of route. But I found the more that I read and the more that I learned about sustainable design, the more it just didn't feel right to me to be designing more products, finding more ideas and designing more products that people probably didn't really need, just to put a sustainable logo on it to make more money to sell more stuff. And I actually realised that through art and music that I'd come from actually had a much bigger impact as far as I could see. And so I started to think about how I could take my love of technology and engineering but bring it into the art world, and take my understanding of the environmental stuff. And like 20 years ago, 25 years ago or whatever, people weren't taking environmental issues very seriously, and outside of the festival world, and I could see a way of really pushing into kind of education and highlighting that sort of stuff, but in a creative way. So started making sculptures of my own out of scrap with a couple of friends, started touring around festivals, avoided Glastonbury totally because my brother was doing his thing here and we wanted to do our own thing. They were like old punks with their punk music and we wanted to do electronic music. So we were doing raves out in the countryside and other festivals and things. Started to realise that we were never going to get very far just using art budgets. So I'd see my family be pretty good artists and never really get anywhere financially because it's so hard to get the money. It seemed like it was all the industry around the artists that always made the money. They were sculptors. So me and my friend kind of realised that all the money at festivals was going into staging and infrastructure. So we started making stages that were sculptures. We started taking those stage budgets and using that to build art. And because we were young and skint, we were going into scrapyards, and we'd learned from my brother about getting stuff from scrapyards. We found a couple of really good contacts in military scrapyards. And at the time that there was lots of wars happening that our government were involved in, and we were pretty pissed off about that. There were marches happening, and it just felt like the only reaction to the march from the government was, like, as far as we could tell, banning marching, which pretty pissed us off. There was a bit of a pissed off kind of vibe amongst our generation, and we were getting towards 2008, I suppose, when the crash happened. And there was a lot of people that were just generally a bit pissed off. But we started to get really hopeful and really enjoy going into military scrapyards and taking this military scrap, which you could buy whatever you wanted. You buy like aeroplanes for £100 a ton, dragging them out and making them into stages. It just, for us, felt really positive. It felt like it was something that we could do, and it was bringing people together, and it was kind of creating a real buzz around the idea of recycling, and certainly between us, it was creating a real buzz about repurposing technology and what you can do with technology. And yeah, I guess it was a time and a place, and it grew. So we started off, we were going to be in the dance village, and my brother found out, and he was like, well, there's no way you can come into Glastonbury and not be part of our area. So there was it called Midnight Carnival, I think, at the time, or Trash City. They gave us a little corner of Trash City to do our dance music, little arena. And the first night it kicked off, we were only supposed to have a few hundred people around the sculpture, around sort of some fires, after hours thing. But it ended up with 5,000 people all over it, going absolutely mental. And the next page was then NME magazine, Glastonbury's new late night area, and Michael Evis, fair play to him, was like, okay, well, we've got a new late night area, let's do it. And it sort of grew and grew, so it was 5,000, 10,000, and within a few years we had like 20,000 people, and Southeast Corner was bursting at the seams. It's causing quite a lot of issues with crowd control and crowd management, so we managed to navigate moving up this way. Lots of long negotiations with trying to find a space that wasn't upsetting anyone. Amazing kind of like relationship building with the Greenfields, whilst navigating the fact that everybody at the Greenfields is like this beautiful chilled energy, and then we're coming on their doorstep with this massive raging noisy beast of a thing. So we managed to find a space over there up by the park. We, being really inspired by the Greenfields and the green aspect of the festival, we started to lean really hard into recycling, lean hard into recycling biofuels for our flame systems for a good period of time. And it's grown and grown and grown. We now have 50,000 people squash into that field after hours, and people seem to really get the repurposing, really get the recycling. BBC even found footage of the helicopter that we've got over there for the Dragonfly in the Falklands War being used, and did a whole documentary last year about transforming this bit of military stuff. So it's a really great place, Glastonbury, I think, for ideas to bubble to the surface and vast amounts of people to engage and debate. And then, yeah, of course, how we've ended up here, chatting to Dale over the years. We've been trying to combat the generators and see if we can get greener energy. And Dale and Claire have delivered this monster of a battery. It's about the size of this tent, which is all charged from wind and solar, which is what now powers the Dragonfly. So yeah, definitely pushing ahead on all fronts. It was definitely one of the earliest stages to be doing that, I think, in the UK. And yeah, it's been fun.
So you went from taking scrap essentially to creating the Arcadia Spider and now the Dragonfly, fully powered on renewable energy. And I think it's important also that kind of to note that the green is synonymous also with the peace movement. So it's not only about environmental sustainability, but you will always find that it goes hand in hand with the anti-war and peace movements. And repurposing the military hardware for celebration has always been so, again, really inspiring. It's almost like the things that you've been doing sound very overt, and like this is the tools and how you do it, and then yours has been very creative, almost like subliminal. Showing different ways of bringing people in through another route. Dale, I'm going to come to you. You obviously have had so many things go on in your life. Don't talk about them all, because I'll run out of time. But starting, I guess, with how you ended up coming to Glastonbury. Sam touched on it already, but what brought you there and what did you do, apart from not pay?
Not pay anybody, actually. Look, my experience of festivals began in the late 70s, early 80s. I was actually here before it was Glastonbury. It was a Green Gathering or something, and then I spent 10 years living on the road through the 80s. And it was free festivals for me, which are the forerunner of the free parties that you bumped into, and festivals were a place to bump into like-minded people that you know shared the same kind of ideals, and together we explored ideas around food choice, around alternative energy, different ways to live, that kind of stuff. It was a real melting pot of ideas and stuff like that. And come the early 90s, I dropped back in from my decade on the road trying to build a big windmill. And I'd been aware of what Sam and Jean were doing here on the Greenfield. And I remember I made them a sketch, right? I sketched this thing. It was a 60-foot tower. I said, I'm going to build this from a scrapyard, like Pip. I've spent a lot of my time in scrapyards. I'm going to build this thing with train batteries at the bottom and a windmill on the top, and I'm going to sell phone calls, right? This is 92, maybe, something like that. Mobile phones had just entered the world. They were like this big, and you carried them like that. And it was a brand new idea. And Sam and Jean, they just said, yeah, go for it. So I did. They never mentioned rent or anything like that. I would have paid, I really would. But everybody thought it was a crazy idea that it wouldn't work. Like, who's going to want to make a phone call in the middle of a festival? I can tell you, we were queued 4 people wide because we had 4 phones and 20 people deep for the whole weekend. It was crazy. And everybody said the same thing. They all came along and they said, hello to whoever they're talking to. Then they looked up and they said, I'm calling you from a wind phone and I don't know what happens when the wind stops. It was just a pattern to the whole weekend. And it was great fun. And that gave me the chance to make the money to build this first windmill in Stroud, which led me to build Ecotricity, world's first green energy company, then a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's my potted history in festivals.
That was a very short summary. And not only did you build Ecotricity, but in between that phase, you spent another 10 years on the road, didn't you? I know you're going to be speaking about the Battle of the Beanfield later. But just to kind of draw a thread behind from your festival experience, and then how much further has it gone since then? You've been in the political realm, in media, you've worked in phones, food, Skydiamond. Do you think that there's been a reverberation from this culture out into the mainstream?
Yeah, so when we come to this question of like our festivals, the birthplace of the green revolution, I'm going to say actually yes, to a degree. And if not the birthplace, then maybe the nursery, right? This is where the ideas were kind of given airspace and were shared and stuff like that. So I spent the 80s on the road, and I spent the 90s trying to build a windmill and a green energy company. And then in the 2000s, I moved into transport and food. Energy, transport and food are the 3 things that make 80% of all of our carbon emissions. And so that became my mission from the early 2000s, to build Britain's first electric car, first national network of charging points actually in the world, stuff like that. Then rescued Forest Green Rovers, turned it into the first vegan football club in the world, and created a process to make diamonds from atmospheric carbon, all kinds of other stuff along the way. I'm just having a kind of a wild, adventurous time. You know, if I'd have imagined it 20 years ago, I might have thought it was like a trip or something like that. You know what I mean? I might have woke up and thought that's never going to happen. But this is happening right now. And I also have this platform. I get the chance to speak to the media about the green economy, the green revolution, that kind of stuff, talk about energy independence, how that's good for people actually, and how we talk about this stuff is like super important. Instead of talking about ice caps and polar bears and the climate crisis, we've got to talk about jobs and the economy, because that's what appeals to most people. How we get our energy bills down, how we keep them down, that's energy independence, that's green energy. And the climate crisis for me is like icing on the cake. It's the thing to put behind your main argument, which is that it's an economic thing. Green now is an economic thing. Back in the day, as Sam said, people used to laugh at it, but they don't laugh at it anymore.
Who's laughing now?
Yeah.
And so I did give the background of, in my case, when I got inspired by these places, we went on to build initially something called a Greener Festival. That started as a checklist of 56 questions and very quickly ended up being picked up by festivals all around the world, to the point that now we've assessed and certified thousands of festivals and events. Loads of people have contributed over the years with best practice. Like Pip mentioned, the way that we're powering the Dragonfly now, we just powered a festival in London, which is owned by one of the big promoters. The commercial promoters, who originally, when they set out, were all just burning diesel and generators, big burger vans, and now they're really almost falling over themselves to try and do what's been done here since the start. So it's been a great movement. I also wanted to touch upon, this is something I was thinking about recently, that I felt that it was free parties, festivals that were influencing us because of showing different ways. But also, for me, certainly, it was the first time that I was feeling connected to the land in some way. I'm part of a community, which is something that we've certainly lost in many cases, where we're in our concrete rooms and on our phones, especially these days. I want each of you maybe to reflect on that a bit, but starting with Pip, because of your connection with Indigenous communities as well, which has been one of the most moving experiences I've certainly had.
What was the question exactly?
Your collaboration with Indigenous
wondering.
communities and the importance of community and connection to the land in some way that then influences wanting to nurture it and take care of it.
Okay. So a bit of context, I suppose. Once things started to get popular here, we started touring the stages we had. We do 6 or 7 international shows between each Glastonbury here with our Spider. Quite a few crew touring around the world with a lot of kit. And it was really quite incredible for a few years, but it definitely got to a point we were like, well, we've built this thing that's about sustainability, and although we're taking some of the message and ideas to places like Bangkok that had never really even heard of the idea of recycling, never mind everything else that was going on, it was getting to the point it was starting to create its own momentum of its own kind of carbon footprint. And a lot of the gigs, it just seemed to be the DJs it was all about the DJs and this English brand coming in, and it didn't really have the connection. I was slightly losing heart in it, and I was slightly losing heart in the whole idea of festivals and dedicating my life to it. And then we went to Perth and we worked with an Aboriginal nation. Quite an incredible story. Probably haven't got time to go into too much now, but essentially we discovered this nation who came along to do an opening ceremony, but it transpired over the year of working with them that they were the last custodials of a song about a spider that weaves an invisible web to unite people together. And this song had been sung for thousands of years, one of the oldest songs on the planet. And they'd actually, the last time they performed it was 1901 to the Duchess of York. She'd been so rude to them that they'd taken it underground, and despite being brought up in Christian families and not being allowed to practice their tradition, they've been continuing to practice this song and this dance about the spider for over 100 years, until they suddenly discovered that this giant spider was going to turn up, and they were being asked to open the show. And not only that, the place we were doing the show in the middle of town, where some buildings had been demolished, turned out to be the ancient ceremonial ground where they used to perform this song forever before. So quite an amazing connection, quite an honour to have been invited to get involved in that. And we actually did a very collaborative performance with them, where they invited us to put some bass lines behind their music and bring in the flames, bring in the lasers, and it made it really relevant in a way that they hadn't really felt their culture had been engaged in properly before. The idea of their culture is about two cultures coming together and creating these ceremonies. So we did this very powerful ceremony. And I think for all of our crew who were maybe getting a little bit jaded with the touring at the time, it just suddenly made us realise what we were starting to think was maybe some sort of slightly wacky out there idea. It really authenticated it, because we realised actually this idea of gathering together in circles around fires and building art and playing repetitive music, goes right back to the start of civilization. Really, it was like super grounding for us, and we just found that there was vast amounts of synergies from that ancient culture with the way that they just totally respected the whole coming together, the whole uniting of tribes, the whole repurposing, the whole respecting the environment. And it's been quite incredible, and we've found since then, bizarrely, as cliche as it might sound, we've found that everywhere we've gone, we've worked with indigenous communities and tried to find the ancient stories and partner to bring these stories to life, and we found it's the same story all over the world. It's very much about connection to people and planet.
I was thinking today as well, it's quite like a pilgrimage coming to a festival, certainly Glastonbury, the endurance getting in and getting out again, and then trying to take what you've learned and hold that with you as you go. I do want to give a chance for people to ask some questions, so I'm just going to ask the last question to each of you before we go to anyone on the floor. So have a think if you do want to ask something. But we've talked about, I mean, it is clear that there is an influence of festivals on the green revolution. We know that we've still got a lot of problems right now in the world, and sometimes they seem like they're getting bigger, if not smaller. So with your experience, with your perspective that you've got in each of your cases, what do you think needs to happen next, or your perspective of the next steps? Are they good as they are? What would you like to see happen through festival culture into the green revolution? Sam?
Well, it's a difficult time at the moment, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of there are countries who are being run by complete idiots, and so I think we've got a big role to play. I mean, in my experience, having people coming over from different cultures to experience Glastonbury is a really great thing, because that really does send the ripples out to across the world. And okay, you can argue, you're spending money on air miles, etc., to get people over here to the festival. But I think if people pick up on things, like in the 90s, we met some very interesting Japanese people, and they brought the first peace flame over to Glastonbury. And we were some of us, I was, asked to go over to Japan and just kind of spread the message a bit. And I was fortunate to go to the first Fuji festival in Japan, and they had the first renewable energy stage in Japan. So that element of teaching what can be achieved from festivals, from green festivals, can ripple out to the world and have a positive effect. I think it is, it's tricky. It's tricky now, because we're all we're insecure. The world is insecure, so we've got even more reason to try and teach the world.
Pip, your thoughts on, I know that you're still creating new worlds and venturing out into the wider world as well. So how do you see the best use of your tools, experience in order to make positive changes?
Yeah, we've really thought about this a lot. And like I said, it was quite amazing last year seeing the momentum we've got behind actually bringing to the surface the idea of repurposing technology and creating these works of art, and the sort of momentum that we have managed to create with that, and the unified feeling we've had with that. I'm very aware of all the conflicts happening around the world. We actually got talking to a guy who'd made quite a lot of money through creating VPNs to go into war zones. So when the government tried to block out the internet, he created technology where he could go around the world and make sure that people could still access the internet, which would be a real peacekeeping thing, because it meant whatever the government was up to would still be exposed globally. His funding's just been cut now by the Americans, sadly, but we got in there just before, and he funded our company for 2 months to work out how we could develop what we do, to not just do things in places like Glastonbury Festival, but to go into post-conflict zones around the world where people really do need to rebuild their cultures and communities, and go in and work with communities to build sculptures from repurposed military stuff within their communities to then put on events. and we're doing our first event starting in September. So we've set up a charity now, where we set up a project which we're partnering with a charity. The project's called Build the Peace, and our first project's in Zimbabwe in a township. We're going down there in September, and we're starting the creation of a stage with them. They found a Rhodesian tank, which might be what we use, I don't know, we might find something else. It's going to be a really interesting journey. They're going to build this sculpture in a township. It's going to stay there permanently as a bit of a symbol, and then they're going to do an event on it. And I suppose we feel like we've got skills and experience and knowledge and resources that we can take down there and support, but also we feel like they have the real depth of knowledge of how you can use art and music to bring people back together when within the face of conflict, and that's something that we want to learn a lot more about, and I feel like the way the world's going.
Yeah, can I kind of echo that? Because you know, so in the war zones around the world, there are desolations being created, cities are being torn to bits and desolated. You know, we all know the war zones. We all know what's happened to the humanity in those parts of the war zones, those parts of the world. And at some point, we're going to have to rebuild some of these towns, these cities, and a lot of new knowledge is going to have to come into it. A lot of green principles are going to have to come through, and you know, if we really want to survive as a species, as humanity, then we have to take those principles forward. And you know, a lot of those principles we're seeing around us now, we should be taking out and rebuilding the world.
Dare, your final thoughts, or open up to the floor?
About the role of festivals?
Yeah, and also the Green Revolution, which I think is what you live and breathe, and your reflections on what these guys have said.
Yeah, so two things maybe. I think festivals are like a place where we bring people out of their comfort zone, out of their normal lives, where people become more receptive to different and new things. I've seen that all my life. It happened to me first as a teenager. So I think festivals have a great opportunity to influence the behaviour and the thinking of the people that come here to Glastonbury or some other festival. It doesn't really matter. It's a chance to present new ways of thinking, new ways of living. In terms of sustainability, it's about food choice first and foremost. I think it's actually the biggest thing. We have to stop eating animals. It's the only way we get to bring back wildlife and fight the climate crisis and the human health crisis as well, actually. Energy is a thing, right? Getting diesel at festivals, I think that's important, but it's not the biggest thing going on in the world right now. And transport, energy, transport and food, they're my big three. In terms of like getting to net zero, building a green economy, all of that kind of stuff, we've got everything that we need. We've got all of the technology. It's increasingly economic. It's the simple, obvious choice. The people are mostly with us, and we just lack governments around the world that are really going for it. If you look at our reaction to the war in Ukraine, we poured $300 billion worth of weapons into Ukraine already. Europe just set up an $800 billion defense fund to build factories, to build more bombs and weapons. We're ready for this imaginary Russian threat that may come one day. That's over £1 trillion worth of investment. If we were to fight the climate crisis like that, then we'd be walking it right now. But I think until things get really bad in terms of extreme weather and impacts and stuff like that, I don't think we will take it seriously enough. But I'm not being negative when I say that. I think it's just human nature. It's got to get a little bit worse before we grasp the problem, and then we tackle it like we're tackling the war in Ukraine. You know, we really go for it, and that'll come.
Maybe we need to get more defence ministers and the treasurer to more festivals. Could be a shortcut. Do we have time for one question, or does anybody have a question first? If you do, we have a mic here. Yeah, do you want to come up? We've got a mic here, so people can hear you.
Thanks all. It's been fascinating to hear the history of this. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much. Fascinating to hear the history and how things evolved and the crucial role of Glastonbury's and festivals in general. I know you've all worked very hard on many different areas. I guess the question is, what's the next step in terms of making this happen across wider society, which, as you say, has to happen. Is it still a sector-based approach being done? You're involved in football, is sports something which can be, the festival experiences can be rolled out into sport more, or something else? I know, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on next steps.
Yeah, sports is a good example, actually. I should have said, it's not only festivals through which we can reach people, they're a great platform to reach people, but we found that in football as well when we rescued our local football club and then brought all of our environment ideas into it. We built what the UN called the greenest football club in the planet, and then they adopted our approach. We've reached our fans, we've changed how they live through football, and the United Nations adopted that into a global program called Sport for Climate Action. The idea is to reach the billions of sports fans on the planet through their favourite sport and communicate with them about the ways they could change how they live, to be more sustainable and stuff. It's a super powerful medium, sport and festivals, to get people to change how they live. And that's what we need more than anything else, I think, is a grassroots approach, because we've got the technology, and we have the talk all of the time at the high level. We need people to change how they live, because when we make spending decisions every day, we get to decide which way the world goes round. If we stop buying the bad stuff, right, meat, fossil fuels, whatever it is, we stop buying it, they have to stop making it, and they will start making the other stuff. It's super important. We think it's beyond our power, beyond our control, but it isn't. We spend money every day on the problems that are driving the world.
Thank you for that question. And just finally to say thank you to each one of you for everything that you've done and everything that you give, because you have all made a massive difference individually as well as with the people that you've been working with. And thank you for joining this panel. And thank you to everybody here, Sam Hermitage, Dale Vince, Kate Rush. Big round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.